I just really loved comedy. I remember, Robin Williams came to shop at my dad's store, and it was such a big deal because, he was a very famous, of course, stand-up comedian, and then, starting to become very famous as a movie star and an actor on television as Mork, so there was such a huge, celebrity surrounding him, and yet he was just some guy who would come and shop at my dad's store, and so my dad's, um I think a real fan like ship of him, like fan worship of him, San Francisco's fan worship of him. Also watching Joan Rivers on Saturday Night Live used to have stand-up comedians. I mean, they still have, of course, stand-up comedians on, but in the 70s, they would actually do like their comedy in a portion of the show, not just in the monologue. And I remember seeing Joan Rivers there and just being so in awe of her and in awe of everything she was doing in the audience and how they seemed like they were her friends, which to me was like, oh, wow, that you could be so famous and yet still have them know you so intimately. It's just really powerful. That was something about stand up comedy that I also recognized it in my being. Like I just knew, oh, this is what I do. This is what I am. And I don't know how I knew that at such an early age, but I'm glad that I did because I wasn't afraid of anything and I just wanted to do it.
Yeah. A lot of the comedians we've talked to have talked about using, humor as a shield sword. It was a way to fight back to something
Mhm.
that happened to them or something that they were having an obstacle with, and it was just a. Did you have any kind of experience like that, the early stages?
Well, I think that for me, comedy is a shield and a sword, but also it's really about being in front of an audience is because you have witnesses. Because anything negative that would happen to me happened in secrecy,
Hmm.
whether it's any kind of like violence or abuse or like bullying, all those really bad things really occurred in a kind of a veil of silence and secrecy. So when you had an audience there, nothing bad could happen to you because you have many, many witnesses. And to me, that's really a very important element of comedy.
Hmm.
So it's less about being in fear of being in front of people, which a lot of people are. I think it's like actually the only place that's safe.
Hmm. That's a really interesting way to look at it. So, I mean, you started so young. I mean, I think you were 16 when you first started doing stand up. Can you talk about your first time on stage? Do you remember what that was like and where the material came from?
My first times on stage actually was when I was 14.
Hmm.
When I was but later on, like I had a comedy duo. So it was me and Sam Rockwell, who we would do shows at the other cafe, which was in San Francisco, and our teacher signed us up for it. So there's actually some of it on YouTube, which is so funny to see now. But it was really weird because we were doing this comedy that adults really loved. And so it was a different novelty as well of having these kids perform. He moved to New York and, of course, is a very famous actor with Oscars and stuff. So he's great. Um, and I stayed in San Francisco, and I really loved the art form of comedy. I didn't want to be a kid anymore. I wanted to try to be an adult. And for some reason, there was a lot of safety for me hanging around adults, you know, when I was a really young person, like too young to be in the clubs in the first place. I don't even know, like my material was mostly about being as young as I was and being around a lot of adults, which I think is really fun too. So there was a lot to talk about and a lot to say, but it also gave me a lot of like time to develop a strong voice as a comedian, which I think maybe emerged more later in my 20s.
Right. Did you have a lot of experiences bombing on stage, and what would you learn from that?
Yes, I had a lot of experience bombing. I still do. But it doesn't happen like a bombing where it's like you're bombing the whole time. You know, it's like sometimes jokes will not go right. And then you're like, well, what's wrong with that? And what am I doing wrong with that? Or how can I make this better? And oftentimes, sometimes mistakes happen, or they're not mistakes, but they're just kind of like development happens when you're always willing to push that line, push that challenge. And so that's what I always try to do is challenge myself to restart and reinvent and try to keep writing and do better. And it's really it's not always perfect. And I think when you get into sort of a mindset of having to always be perfect, then you'll get stagnant.
Mm. When did you start imitating your mother in your act? Is that right
I
away?
started I started imitating my mother very early. I mean, it's one of my very first jokes, and it's still very much part of who I am because it's the voice of my Asianness. I mean, it's really about um, this sort of immigrant looking at the way that the world has changed for them, even though my parents have been here much, much longer than they were ever in Korea. But they still retain a lot of like this idea, like this is a new world. This is a new existence. And so it's sort of looking at the world through their eyes too. So I think that's a lot of fun.